Welcome to the Recovery Stories podcast, bringing you stories of hope, healing, and triumph over the bondage of addictions, mental health struggles, trauma, and dysfunctional family systems. Our courageous storytellers have chosen to live their journey out loud in order to show others that they don't have to suffer in silence. The stories you will hear are raw, real, and may involve graphic and triggering content. This podcast is brought to you by Promises Behavioral Health's Rooted alumni community. If you or a loved one are struggling, have questions, or are ready to take the next step, call our admission center at 888-648-4098. Or visit us online at www.promisesbehavioralhealth.com. Our team is ready and waiting to answer the call for help.
Welcome to this episode of Rooted Recovery Stories. My name's Patrick Custer, and I'm your host. So excited to be here with you once again. It truly is a gift. Today's episode is going to be epic. I'm really excited to have this guest who has been a real gift in my journey to growing as a human being. And I'm excited to hear his story and talk more about the whole journey. Beck Gee, welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So glad that you're here today. So there are so many parts to your story that I'm excited to talk about, both professionally, personally, and I'm not going to give anything away. So I love to start out at the very beginning. One of my favorite questions to ask people to kick things off is, what is your earliest memory or few earliest memories? And from that perspective, how would you describe your life when you put yourself back into that kid? How would that kid describe what life looked like for them at that point?
Wow. You just go right in. You go right into
dive head first.
Just dive head first into my inner child. It's great. As you were saying that, I was just seeing all of these, pictures in my mind of who I was when I was little.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as I share my story, it'll make more sense. And I think, sitting with my Hot Wheels and He-Man toys and Tonka trucks, and just I grew up in the desert, and I grew up pretty much alone. My siblings are 10 and 12 years older than me, so I was alone a lot as a kid. So I did a lot of kind of isolated play, where
Mm-hmm.
just having fun and creating things and being on my own. And I just remember just being so free. As I went to 5 and 6 years old, right? Just being so free to be who I was, being this little boy, just dirty and in it,
Mm-hmm.
at any given point in time, and just feeling very much myself at that age. So you just brought back a really positive memory for me. And awesome. Before all of the crap started, before kind of the world hit me. And I think that's what I try to get back to today in my recovery, is trying to, and really even as my recovery evolves, trying to get back into that space of play, of being who I am, and being happy with that.
That's beautiful. So as we move forward in your timeline, what did life look like for you? How did things progress? You kind of laid mention to it. It sounded like things weren't quite as great in the years to follow.
Yeah, I think life really hit, when I went to school, when I started going to school. So just to, jump to who I am today, I'm a trans person. I am a trans man. I transition in my recovery, and we'll get to that piece. But just for people to kind of understand, while I'm kind of talking about realizing that who I was, to my core, when I went to school for the first time in kindergarten, and they started lining us up in, girls lines and boy lines. And I was going into the boys line and they were like, no, you can't go there. You're a girl.
Mhm.
That really started my struggle with the world around me.
Mhm.
I really believe, that it was the kind of pivotal moment of being like, you can't be who you are. And so I played the game, right? I stepped into, I was a really good student. I did the best I could. And though ending up in the principal's office because of, not wanting to go into the girls' lines a lot, my parents told me, well, you can be a boy at home, but you have to be a girl in school. And that was really confusing for me, right? Like I was,
Sure.
so I think I grew up really confused and conflicted of like who I was and who I was supposed to be. And so I really played into this idea of who am I supposed to be, right? And who does the world want me to be? Not who I am, but who does, how can I get by with little to no kind of um, recognition or just like the spotlight being on me so I could just kind of get by and do my best and appease everyone around me. Uh, and I did that
Yeah.
and I was really good at it.
You know, I really haven't had this thought before, but as you're explaining that, it just sparked, a thought for me, realizing that people who don't, non-trans individuals could really, we really could take a look at just exactly what you described from lived experience that you all, um, many of you live, feeling that the dysphoria, feeling like you have to be in search of who the world wants you to be, because even though it's a different experience, I think that people, like whether you're a cis gay person or whatever, just a certain degree, many of us experience certain levels of um, uh, find trying to being in search of who we think the world wants us to be, rather than trying to find our own truth and of who we are. And you all, though, are forced to do that in such a way that is, I would say, if I may, much more extreme than probably any other faction of the population. Would you
Yeah, I
agree with that?
think I would agree to a certain extent. I think, as I'm being very pragmatic about this, right? I think that there's a lot of
Yeah.
people who, even trans people who maybe not don't have this experience. This is my experience, but like, but I do think that like when I'm trying to connect like trans experience with maybe finding that empathy and that like certain connection, right, that we all need to have with each other, that like common link. I think that, yeah, a lot of cis people, a lot of people that aren't trans, like do like can understand that. They can get to the point of like, wow, yeah, I was really trying to be something that I'm not, right? um cisgender men living up to the expectations of their parents, right, or their fathers, or just and really not being, we hear that story a lot. It's like, I wanted to be an artist and, my parents wanted me to go to business school. So I went to business school and I was completely unhappy, right? Like all of those
Yeah.
things. And I'm really an
Yeah.
artist inside, right? Like, I mean, I feel like it's very similar, right? This
Yes.
process of authenticity, this process of who am I and how do I live my life to the fullest and to the best, to my truth, I would say, is a common story. And I do think that, my story of like, you know, even not understanding that at 5 years old, right, back in the 80s, where like this conversation around trans identity wasn't really like in the forefront as it is today, so much that like, I was a tomboy. Oh, I would get through that phase, or I'm just, and I think my parents thought that to the best of their ability too. They didn't know, right? They had no idea,
Mhm.
and all of the information that I was gathering was like, oh, I can't be that, right? I can't be that. I didn't even know that trans men existed until I was like 21 years old, right? So like, So I just knew I was different. I just knew that I didn't fit in a way that felt comfortable, though I tried my best. I had the boyfriends, I had the school, did the sports, I tried to fit in, but there was always this sense of feeling very alone, and also saying, if you find out who I am, you're going to leave, right? If you know who I am.
Mm.
And so I just put on a mask. I just played the part, right? That's where drugs and alcohol came in to really help, you know, mask it even more, and I could
Mhm.
just be someone who I wasn't. And it was easier for me. It was easier for me.
Wow. So, I mean, that makes sense because I get it in a different, from my own story. What point was that introduced for you? And could you share a little bit about like what that period of your life looked like?
Sure. I mean, I grew up with an alcoholic dad, and like a fairly codependent mom, very classic family system in that way.
Yeah.
So nothing was wrong at home.
Right.
Everything behind closed doors, those kinds of things. I took my first drink at I was like 14, really, to the point of like I think 14 to the point of like drunkenness. Like took it like as far as I could, and um, got blackout drunk, and it was like the best night of my life, right? It was, um, I found connection, I found friends, I found, people were talking about it the next Monday at school, like, oh my God, I can't believe you did that, those kinds of things. And I felt
Yeah.
included and like felt like, oh, I've arrived, right? This is what it is. And it didn't look like my dad's alcoholism, right? It didn't look like the pain and anger and sadness at home. It looked like fun and good times, and like I'm here, and so which, as we know, like my dad was at the end of his addiction, right? And I was at the beginning. So the beginning is always, for the most part, in my story, looked really good and really fun.
Right.
So, that carried me. And, the idea that like, I didn't want anyone to know, right? Because like alcoholism and addiction looked really bad. I didn't want anyone to
Mm-hmm.
know I was a bad person. So I kept getting the good grades. I kept going to school. I did all the things. Um,
Did
and
you know that you had a problem? Did you self-identify that it was problematic for you, or at this point, what were you believing that this was still a solution that was just a good thing for you?
Yeah, definitely wasn't a problem for me at the
Yeah,
I didn't
yeah,
identify that it was like, oh
right,
shoot, like I'm gonna,
yeah,
it was like, oh, I'm gonna do this different. Like I'm not gonna be the alcoholic like my dad. Like I'm not gonna be that guy. So yeah, it took me, and I went through early college, and then, my drinking progressed. I got a job as a bartender, which was the best thing ever.
of course,
I came out when I was, 18 as gay, as a lesbian, and because that felt the closest to me. Like it was like, oh, I feel connected in this community. Again, I didn't know like what being trans was, and um, so I connected to a community, and I started working at a gay bar, and like for me, like that was like home. And again, for a kid who felt so alone and so not seen, right? Like I finally felt somewhat at home. Even if it still wasn't exactly the fit, it felt better than it was before.
mm-hmm. Yeah. It makes sense. I mean, it absolutely makes sense. And we hear that. I feel like we hear that story so often the time from people from across the spectrum of our LGBTQ plus community that um, gay bars are where we find our haven, our first haven anyway, of safety and security and acceptance and love.
Yeah.
And so, um, what did so when did the problem when did it go from being serving you to
Yeah.
not serving you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I could look back and kind of say, wow, it wasn't serving me for a long time before I realized
Yeah.
it, right? Like I was going through relationship after relationship.
Hmm.
It was always the drama of the bar and people around me. It was never me. I was definitely not identifying that I was the common denominator in a lot of these situations, or that alcohol and drugs were the common denominator of that stuff. It was I was 27 when I met the first person who I would say was like a person in recovery. I was working at the bar, and her partner would come in and they would dance till 2 a.m. and they would order like soda water with cranberry, and I was like, what is happening? Right. There was something that this person had, like something in their eye, something that was just like so like like attractive, in the
Hmm.
way of like, who are you? Like, just like this energy that was just so like magnetic. And we became friends. And she became my token sober friend. I found out she was sober like 10 years or so. And I was her token drunk friend. and
Hmm.
it was like in May of 2005, I had, I guess, texted her at night at 3 or 4 in the morning. I was known for drunk texting. And
Oh
I
gosh.
she's like, yeah, let's go to lunch and talk about this. And I was like, oh no, what did I say? And
Yep.
I had texted her like 4 in the morning. I think I need help. And at that point, I had been like, I was the last one at the bar. I was waking up on people's lawns. I was, in these weird relationships. I was cheating on people. I was taking other friends' partners. I was doing whatever. I was just like me, 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 and trying to fill this like deep, deep like soul sadness. I would say, and and I was late at night, I was drinking, I was saying, oh, like I had said, I met the first trans guy I'd ever met, and it clicked with me that that might be who I am. But I was like, there's no way I could like come out again. Like I was like, I came out as gay. I lost a lot of friends from high school. Like I struggle with my family around that piece, right? Like there's no way I can like come out as this. Like I don't even know what this is, right? But it makes it, and so I would like use and think about it late at night, and just try to like push it down, with drugs and alcohol. Um,
Like I
and
never thought about that being probably a very common experience for trans people to go through, having to do a coming out twice, because it just makes sense that
yeah,
this first stepping stone is coming out as gay, and then being the trans,
hmm,
um beyond that. And
yeah,
I can't, knowing what
yeah,
it was like for me to come out, I can't imagine having a second thing of
yeah,
having to come out as like,
yeah.
whoa.
I feel like I professionally come out now after like all the because like and the story of, I think, like of people in recovery. So there's going to be a lot of people listening to this that aren't trans or aren't part of the
Yeah.
LGBT community,
Yep.
who don't have this experience, but they can't understand the experience of coming out sober as well,
Hmm.
as which is another coming out process that I did,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
You know, when it was time for me to, when I realized like I want to change my life, like something clicked for me. I had like this moment of clarity. Like that's what's like kind of said. Like I didn't go to treatment. I went to programs, and I went, and I did recovery in a different way. Only because like the people that took me to a meeting for the first time, and and um, for me, it was really about, when I came out sober, right? I lost a whole nother group of friends, right? Those friends from the
Hmm.
bar, like when I stopped buying drinks, when I stopped buying, like when I stopped living there, I did a geographical. I moved to Bozeman, Montana.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I was supposed to be there from Santa Cruz, California. I was supposed to be there for 3 months to help my friend open a restaurant, and I ended up staying there for 5 years, and getting sober there.
That's awesome. You
Um,
got sober your first 5 years in sobriety were in Bozeman, Montana.
Yeah. Yeah. And so this like queer kid with all these like rodeo cowboys, it
Yeah,
was just like, it was wild, it was really wild. But they
I
loved
can't
me,
imagine.
they just were like, listen, we're together in this and we'll, we're here for you. So it was a really great experience for me. And, you know, um, like any good person, sober person, I went back to school and, got my undergrad and I ended up going for my master's degree, which led me into my career today. And, um, but I was
Can we
about,
jump back real quick? I feel like
yeah,
we
of
skipped over
course.
something though.
Oh, we did.
When did, because we went from coming out as gay to coming out as sober.
Trans. Oh, sober.
In between that, you came out as trans. And what was that? So no,
No,
when was the,
we're in the right
okay.
timeline. Yeah. I came out as
Okay,
sober
my bad.
first. Yeah. I know all these coming outs, right? I came out as sober first. Yeah.
Yeah.
2005. And so like I lived, and I was, I was sober. I was like happy, I was like,
Hmm.
my life was getting put together again. Like I was feeling more myself. I still had this like missing piece that was like, and it was about 6 months sober when I called that friend who I met who was trans when I was back in the day. And I had him tell me his story again. I believe that the power of storytelling is in connection is really, really powerful. Obviously, I mean, obviously you do too, doing this work.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that he told his story and I said, oh, I was like, that definitely is me. And but I was like, again, I was like, there's no way I could come out again. There's no way I could come out as trans. I came out as gay. I came out as sober. I lost people in my communities. I can't lose this community too. I'm just
Hmm.
I'm gonna go in my grave with this, you know? And I almost did, to be honest. Like if I can get very real here, is that
Absolutely.
about 5.5 years sober. I had graduated I had got my master's degree. I was living in Minnesota and I was so sad. And I was getting into a deep depression. I was working in the LGBT community as a clinician, doing counseling, working at a treatment center, helping people come out as trans, doing talks about being a trans ally, and like literally was just like kind of screaming from my internal self. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, I can't live like this lie anymore, And
Hmm.
that took me to a really dark place of like almost attempting suicide at like 5.5 years sober. And I always include that in my story because I think that there's a lot of like shame of like, oh, you should just get sober and everything's like happy, joyous, and free, and like
Yep.
everything's great, good, and you're and that's just not my story, and it can be for some people, but that's just not my story. Um, my story, yeah, things got better and then things got worse again because I wasn't being honest with who I was because I was so afraid. I was so afraid to lose people again and to be alone. Um, so, that day in October that I was going to let my life just go, I had another moment of clarity where I stepped back and I said, I need to talk to someone about this first. I need to like see a therapist. I need to, do. And so I called a friend who gave me a number of a therapist who really kind of saved my life. She, and she wasn't part of the LGBT community and she wasn't sober. And she, she just knew how to be a really good trauma therapist. And I walked into her office that day and she said, well, tell me about yourself. And I said, I'm trans. It was the first things I said. And it was the first time I said it out loud. It was the first time I said it to anyone, really.
What did that feel like for you?
It felt it felt very much like almost when I first said I was an alcoholic, right? When I first said I was an alcoholic, I had two pieces. that I held in my hands. One was so sad that I'd gotten to that point, right?
Hmm.
Like,
Hmm.
oh God, I'm here. And then so free about like, I finally said it, and like, there are people around who understand. And so when I said that about being trans, I was like, I couldn't believe that it took me so long, right? Because at this point I was, you know, 32 years old. Um, and, and then at the same time, like, I finally felt free to like, that I finally said it to someone out loud,
Yeah.
that I just said like, and then she was like, great, what do we want to do about it? You know, like, where do we want to go from here? I was like, I don't fucking know. You know, like, I
Yeah.
confess, but I
Right.
was like, I don't know.
Yes.
You know, I have
Yeah.
no idea. And then we walked through it. We walked through it slowly together. And I started this journey of my life, and um, I can't believe like I'm here now, right? Like, so that's, that was 11 years ago, 12 years ago now,
Hmm.
almost 13. And my life has significantly shifted and changed over that time, you know?
It's beautiful. I I I wanted to let you finish the momentum of that portion of your story before I throw this in there, but it really popped into my head of how I related, and I think that many other people might be able to relate that, some people get sober, life gets better, and it's great. But I think that that's probably not the norm. I think that a lot of us get sober and there's stuff that we hold on to. One of the biggest tenets, no matter what you're practicing when it comes to getting sober, staying sober, and getting healthy, and hopefully becoming more and more healthy, is honesty with those who we care about, with those around us, and with ourselves, most importantly. And there's some stuff, or one thing for some of us, like, that we're just like, I'm either going to take this to the grave, or it takes us some time before. And so, unfortunately, sometimes ends up killing people, almost killing people, whatever the case may be. And so I just wanted to like recognize that, hold some space and reverence for that, because I think that that is something that has crossed the plane, what so many of us experience in sobriety. It's not supposed to be. You get sober and everything's fixed and perfect. We get sober and like the stuff we've been pushing down comes to the surface. We gotta,
Yeah.
like, then we're dealing with like feeling our emotions or insecurities or our true identities without something to mask it.
Right.
And that's
Yeah. I mean,
scary.
we get reality, right? We get like, and without like this like wall of addiction, right? Like we get this chance to like kind of like look at our past, and then as long-term recovery happens, right,
Hmm.
we're faced with the present, right? We're faced, I mean, so many people, I've just seen so many amazing people in my life who have faced the unfaceable and the unthinkable, right? And it's not, because they're a bad person. It's not because any of that. It's just like that's what life is, and that's what, a lot of us like ran from, with our addictions. Um, and why, when people are going through really great times, really hard times, any of that, like we have to just be present to the fact, like I can't use through this for me. Like I can't, like maybe want to, or maybe I like think it would be easier, or maybe like, but any of those things, I have to be very present to like, okay, like this is the emotion I'm going through. But what a great like opportunity, like, I mean, like even in presently in the last couple of months for myself is like I've been able to like walk through emotions and feel my feelings,
Hmm.
so that they kind of, and then I'm like, oh, okay, I'm done with that now. Where, like, if this was like 17 years ago, like I would have held on to that forever. Like
Heck
that
yeah.
feeling would have like lasted, plus a hangover, plus,
Hmm.
all the things I would act out upon because of that feeling, right? Like, and then I'd have to like clean it up. So today I get to deal with those feelings and let them pass through and kind of be like, okay, what do I need to do with that? Right? Like, how do I get to sit with that feeling, which is something that I was so uncomfortable doing in the past.
Right. It's a new level of freedom once we get to reach that, the sweet spot that you're talking
Oh, for
about.
sure. For
Yeah.
sure.
So, my gosh, no pun intended, transitioning to this next part that I want
Yes, all the
I want to
transitions.
say,
Yeah.
and then ask you about.
Mhm.
All right. So respectfully, I think that it is important to recognize as a non-trans person that, I don't feel like it is my right to ever barge into someone else's life. And when I find out that they're trans and be like, oh, since you're out as a trans person, it's just okay to ask you whatever my questions are about being trans. It can be very private, sensitive, all the things, traumatic. And so I think I hold a high regard and a high respect for everyone's personal story of being trans, your story of transitioning, and your story of recovery. First of all, being vulnerable enough to get on a public podcast and share it. I know that you already are very public about your story and whatnot, but it goes without saying that I want to recognize and say thank you for your vulnerability in that, let alone. But I also want to recognize how important it is that in every avenue, when we're talking to humans that have been through this experience, that asking somebody about their experience being trans, it is very important to do it with a level of respect. And I want to thank you for opening up and being willing to share what that's been like for you. Because I think that there are many, probably most of the people listening, that this may be their first time hearing directly from someone who has a trans life experience, and what their experience, what that was like. So, having said that mouthful, hopefully I didn't stumble over my words. I would love to hear what you would like to share from your heart about what that process was like for you, how it affected your recovery, your relationships, you name it.
Yeah, for sure. And I like that you kind of, shared that around, when, like, if people are listening and they meet someone who's trans, right? Or like they, maybe like find out that their friend is trans, it's like how do we talk about it? How do we share it?
Mm-hmm.
How do we ask about it? Right? How do we, and I don't find that like asking about people's stories is a bad thing. I think it's about why do I need to know? Right? That's when I
Mm-hmm.
first, like, even myself, right? Like, I meet plenty of trans people. I don't ask them about their, or cis people. Like, I don't ask them all the time about their stories. I do, and I'm curious and I want to get to know someone, but it's like, what am I trying to gain out of this? Right. Because there's plenty of things that I can learn online. There's, people, you can find me online. You can go to a training if you want to learn about stuff. But if you want to know someone's story and like, and I like to say that like being trans is probably the most boring thing about me. That it is part of my story. It's what I do for work and all of that. However, like, my identity is really like is the best part of it is just like once I came out and it's like I was finally free, and I was
Mm-hmm.
finally that core of being like, I don't want to say like happy as in this kind of vapid happy, but this joy of like,
Yeah.
when I talked about at the very beginning of this, that little boy, right, who was everything, who still in me today is the voice that I need to listen to, who knew me before I knew me, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that is the person that I want to listen to. That's the person with all of the insight that
Mm-hmm.
at my core of who I am, it's him, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think a lot of times when we think about trans people, and because of how media has represented and all of the has been politicized and all of this stuff, right? Take that all away, and we never get to like the joy of being trans, right? And the
Mm.
excitement and the piece of it, right? A lot of times we always think about the heartache and the trauma and that, because that's the narrative that we've been fed. And even as a trans person, that's, I'm supposed to be like dysphoric and sad and like pain and full of pain, where it's like, what about that like trans joy? What about that joy of authenticity? What about that joy of honesty and that freedom that we
I
don't
love
really
that.
talk about?
I love that you're bringing that up, because I think that an observation I have on this is that, like, under the whole umbrella of human rights becoming rights and being not acknowledged in mainstream, for whatever reason it is, I feel like it's almost been one of those things where the tragedy and the trauma of how people suffer from trans related bullying issues, not being heard, not being validated, all of those things has been, in some ways it's needed to be used as a tool in order to
For
get the
sure.
world's attention. Um, and my gosh, I hadn't really thought about the fact that like we've sat in that for a while. Like
Hmm.
as so far as when the word trans comes up, so much of the time it's just followed by what's the sob story accompanied. So
Hmm.
what is the joy? That, I mean, like
Yeah.
that's so
Yeah.
beautiful. Yeah, tell
Yeah.
us about that.
Yeah. And I don't want to minimize anyone's, because there is pain there, right? There is, but my pain, and this is my hypothesis too, right? Like, I mean, I have a lot of privilege, right? I'm white, I'm male, like I have this ability to walk through the world and not actually um, be like, I guess just walk in the world and just be, right? Where a lot of trans people can't, right? And so, like, I want to just address that and name that here too, is that, I don't want to minimize anyone's like struggle, because there is
Hmm.
struggle. Um, and my job as a clinician, and I work with young people and I work with trans people, is like, I want to help them find their joy in this, because it's almost, again, like threading this like idea of recovery too. I wouldn't get sober unless I was having fun, right? Like I would like, why get sober if I'm not going to have a good time, right? Like, and in a transition for me is like, and it's been hard. There's been some really hard, sad, horrible times. And where's the light, right? Where's the light? Because I need to find that. Where are the people who are like experiencing that trans joy, experiencing, and what trans joy is just being in the world and being able to just
Hmm.
live your life. And it's amazing. It's very easy having basic human rights, getting to have a job, getting to have friends, getting to like, it's the very basic needs is where the joy is, right? The very
Hmm.
basic necessities of every, like the lives that most people have, having a family, having dogs, having,
Hmm.
like people that I care about. Being able to like walk in the world and go do fun things, right? Like, I mean, that's trans joy. It's like, again, not like super exciting. It's nothing different than your joy.
Hmm.
However, like, I mean, it's like, and like people who are not LGBTQ, or who maybe are not part of a marginalized community, like, I think that us being joyful, us being happy is actually scarier for, you know, people who are against us, right? So
Yeah.
there's this idea that, like, it's been said, I don't know who said it, but definitely wasn't me, so I'm not going to trademark it, but that, you know, trans joy is resistance, right? Where that is an act of resistance, is to just be joyful and
Mm.
loving. And I mean, that's why we celebrate, right? That's why
Hmm.
we have these moments of celebration. And like I celebrate, like if I have a young person who starts testosterone or estrogen, like we'll have a cake for them. We like celebrate these moments, these pivotal pieces of their life.
Hmm.
And that's those are amazing things. Those are a change of the, and again, people in recovery who get chips, in certain places, right?
Yeah.
Like that's why we celebrate those things, right? We celebrate those milestones. I do the same thing in my transition, and like because all, in all those aspects, we're living our truth, and those
Mm.
things should be celebrated.
So true. I think I wanted to throw in there as you're talking about that, it brings up something that a activist and educator on trans issues, Jeffrey Marsh, who I just love. Is it Jeffrey Marsh? Do you know who I'm talking about?
They're
They,
amazing.
yes.
Yeah. Hmm.
I'm s- I, am I'm
You didn't
sorry if
use
I
it.
just
No,
said the wrong pronouns.
you didn't say the wrong pronoun. No, no, no. They're
Okay.
amazing. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So did a wonderful video recently that was so gosh, it was one of those aha moments for me. Which, I've heard so many times about trans people speak and non-binary people speak about being misgendered, being such a hurtful thing that you almost it never stops hurting, but sometimes you become numb because it's like it just happens so over and over and over and over and over and all those things,
Mhm.
and that um, that it was asked like, okay, well, if you were going to compare it so that a non trans or um, uh, non-binary person could understand, what would how would you describe it? And they described it as, well, look, we weaponize misgendering people from a very young age. So on the soccer field, on the sports field, coaches or teammates or whatever, talking about cis
Mm.
men will, refer to another guy as a female, as a girl, you sissy, you this, you that. Um, and they said, I mean, nobody likes that. Nobody
Mhm.
likes no cis female when they're younger enjoys being called, a man or being manly if that's not how they identify. And it's so simple. I never thought about it that way, but it's so true. I mean, we can all actually identify with not liking that, and I think pretty
Right.
much everybody at some point through our development was misgendered,
Mhm.
either by a joke or it being weaponized to be, hurtful in some form or way, and so I just, when it comes to that, and this being such a hot topic, people being aware and using pronouns and being sure to honor those and what have you. Um, I think that as you were talking about the joy and just feeling free, that's what, as like from the other side of the fence for me, that came up. Just I have to think that, because as a gay man, I feel like everybody around me knew I was gay way longer. Like since I was a kid, my aunt, my cousins, they were all like, "We knew you were gay since you were like 3." I didn't come out until I was 24,
Mhm.
and or even to myself. So, but I was called sissy. I was called a girl so many times as a young kid, and that hurt really bad.
Mhm.
And so I can't imagine the joy of just being referred to as the correct identification that you are.
Sure.
Like that, when you're talking about that, like just being able to be, for me, that's what I'm hearing. Like
Mhm.
that it's like you can breathe and just
Yeah.
live like the with the freedom that we should all have.
Yeah, and it's so simple. I think that there's this idea that this is something that is it's too difficult, and it's like, oh, this is just like PC woke culture, and it's like, why
Hmm.
don't you just, what if we just did it and it'd be okay, you know? Like, what if you just like respected people in their own
Yeah.
journey in their life and be okay? Like, it's my living my truth and my authentic self does not hurt you, right?
Yep.
It actually helps you, because I'm a
Absolutely.
happier person. I'm, a more connected person in society. I'm, like, if we could just like be in that space of like, like being, we've lost, I just think of like, we've lost so many trans people,
Hmm.
to, and LGBTQ people, we'll just say, to
Yeah.
suicide, to addiction. There's so many lights have gone out, and I just wonder what the world would look like, if it weren't the
Hmm.
case. I think that's why I do the work that I do. That's why I continue
Yes.
to share my recovery, share my story of my trans self, in order to, I don't know, just to help where I can, and show people that there's a different way of life, and that, I think I had someone come up to me, and she she said to me, it was after a talk, and she said, "You're the first trans person I've ever met," and she's like, "You're so normal." I was like, "Thank you." I don't know. I don't find myself normal at all, but I
Right.
think that whatever ideas people have in their brains about trans people, about people in recovery, about the stigma of addiction and all that stuff, it's like,
Yep.
this is like breaking those stigmas. It's like breaking it apart and
Hmm.
saying, I'm here, I'm human. We can have connection, we can have conversation, we can agree, we can disagree, but we can all respect each other, and we can live in this, like, in peacefully, right? Like, I mean, like, I this still is miscongeniality fantasy world, like, I want world peace. Yeah, absolutely I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for me, that peace started internally, with getting sober and showing up who I am.
And I can't tell you how grateful that I am that you're still here because of the wonderful work you're doing. And, I mentioned earlier on in the show about the effect that you had on my life, both professionally and personally. Um, when our paths first crossed, I met you. I was in the audience. You didn't meet me. We, met years later, but you were doing a training at, one of the facilities that I worked at for addiction treatment, and on basically trading on understanding how to treat clients with dignity and respect, being trauma informed with all things related to LGBTQ plus, and with respect, right? At the time, I was already out, but I had no idea the terms, what it looked like to be respectful, and what's appropriate to ask, what's not appropriate to ask or say, or all those things when it comes to especially trans individuals. And it was so enlightening and meaningful and powerful to me because it opened my eyes. It made me a little sad because I think I sat in this place of privilege thinking that I go to Pride every year. I'm a kind and compassionate person, but I had no idea how some of my mindset was structured in a way that was just not thoughtful, was ignorant. I hadn't taken the time to do some of the research that I think that if I think of myself as a caring, compassionate person, is my responsibility to do. And so I am grateful and I thank you for uh, the work that you started, the work that you've continued to do in educating others, because I think it's the one and main way that we will achieve change in society. That the numbers of not only, I mean, we talk about suicide, that's the worst case scenario, and that's just abysmal. But what about all
Hmm.
the people that are like staying alive, living with the pain?
Yeah.
Um, the last statistic I heard was, and this is an umbrella for LGBTQ plus kids. LGBTQ plus kids are 8 to 9 times more likely to attempt or complete suicide than regular adolescents and teens. LGBTQ plus kids who live in non-affirming households, that is doubled.
Mm-hmm.
So it's 9 times over that number, which just I don't know where that study came from, but I've heard it a number of times, so it's somewhere out there.
I think it's the Trevor Project. Yeah.
So, and that's what the most reputable source it could come from.
Yeah.
So not just the suicide piece, like I said, like that is sad enough because the life has ended and the lights burned out. But let's talk about all the people that are still alive, living with the turmoil because they haven't found solution. They haven't found acceptance. The community hasn't changed. And that is only going to happen through education. So I thank you for the work you're doing and for continuing to stay vulnerable and doing things like this. What you do in your everyday life, which I'll ask you to share here. What is that you're, professionally that you do?
Sure. I do a couple of things. So I have a consulting business where I consult with organizations, institutions, families, coaching, coaching people who are in gender transition. That's my own business, is BGC Consulting. And then I am director of LGBT programming at an adolescent center here in Los Angeles called Visions. And it's just a wonderful place where we can my job really is to create belonging for young people, and so that we do see those lights come back on for kids with mental health issues and dual diagnosis issues. And also, I think, just the work that I do is that I get paid to do is amazing, right? And then just the work that I get to do and just coming on these spaces and helping families find treatment wherever in the world for their other family members, whether there be adolescents, adults, young adults, older adults, right? Because not all treatment is affirming, not all, even though they say they are, they may not be.
Yeah.
And I just really love to help people find the best possible place they can within the parameters that they need to find treatment. If I can, I think there's not enough. There's not enough. There's not enough beds in the world of people that need help. But I do like what you said too. Is obviously the suicide rates are wild and just out of control. But the people that are living with and suffering, that's where we need to go too. That's where we need to step in and help where we can. And for young people, I like to say this too, for the adults listening, even if a family isn't affirming, there is a statistic that if an LGBTQ youth has at least one adult in their life that's affirming, their rates of depression, anxiety, substance use goes significantly lower. So you can be that one adult, right? You may not, maybe your kids, friends are LGBTQ, be an affirming household, right? Just show up for these kids who may not have that at home. All it takes is one adult, and you can be that adult. And that's what I try to do.
I just got those chills down my spine as you said that, because you're speaking to everybody, literally everybody. That doesn't matter who you are. That's something that an awareness that we get to carry. In today's world, I think that it would be really hard to, as long as you're not agoraphobic and live inside your house and don't ever leave, right? We all have an opportunity to be exposed to an LGBTQ plus youth, and you never know what's going on inside the walls of their home. So carrying that knowledge that you just shared with us is so powerful. That being said, you've shared a lot of great information with us today. But for those of us who may want to further our education into trans issues, LGBTQ plus, all of those things, and do our own work and our own research, are there some resources that you would refer us to do that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I would go to Trevor Project, that they have a lot of resources on there. Trans Law Center has a lot of resources per state around, especially if you're in transition or if your young person's in transition. Every state has different rules and regulations, and they have it by state. It's pretty amazing. You can come to my website, bgcbridge.com, find me, email me if you need resources in your state around, therapists, things like that. I can always help you find that. Remember that when you go to Psychology Today, all you have to do is check a box that says you're LGBT affirming. That doesn't necessarily mean you are. So let us find you someone who we know in our network is glad to help with that. And I think just continuing to, vote, continuing to show up in people's lives, continuing to learn. I like what you said, even as a cis gay man, you didn't know everything, right? And
Yeah.
as a gay trans guy, I don't know everything either, right? Like I know just a little. I do this work 24/7. So people in the room, in the room, the realm of like listening to this, if you don't know and you're just like, this is too overwhelming, it's okay. Like, it's okay. Like, where things are always changing. And so we get to just step in and kind of say, like, I want to hear your story. I don't know about that. Do you want me to Google it, or do you want to tell me your story? Right. Especially with a young person. That's what I like to say to parents and to adults in the room, like kids, like if you want to know, like if you want to think that you know nothing, just work with teenagers, right? Because I don't know anything when it comes to teenagers, and they're telling me new stuff all the time. And so,
Yeah.
I'll say, like, do you want me to Google that? Because I can, because I have the capability. It's very easy. All of us can. Or do you want to tell me about that? I would like to hear that from you. And teenagers love to tell you what you don't know. So just, uh, just go in with this curiosity that is like comes from a place of love and comes from a place of unknowing and humility. Because I think if we think we know everything, then we're on the wrong track.
Could not agree with that more. It's
Yeah.
interesting how I feel like a lot of us, when we cross that bridge from teen years, the invincibility years to become, we like late 20s, 30, so many of us say like, wow, do I realize now? I feel like I know so much less. Like I don't know anything. When I was 20, I thought I knew literally everything. But when it comes to this stuff, we've just been so brainwashed in society to be like, well, I've like stake in the ground. I
Right.
already, whatever. So I think what a great piece of advice, on how to approach this that you've given us. So much wonderful information. And I can't thank you again for opening up and sharing your experience, continuing to be that light in our world. It's monumental. So
Thank you, Patrick. Thanks for doing this too. This is a big deal. It's really, really important work you're
absolutely.
doing.
Absolutely. Okay. Last, I always like to ask this last word of encouragement. You've been very encouraging the whole way through this, but, for the person watching that it says, gosh, I relate in any way to any part of your story. Is there a last word of encouragement that you would like to leave with them?
Just stay here. That's it.
Mm,
Like, I think, reach out, find a group that you can be, connected with, but just stay here.
mhm.
I don't think, I imagine, sometimes like, especially around October, like had I missed out on the things that I've done over the last, you know, 12 years and 17 years in recovery. And um, it's amazing, so
Yeah.
just stay. We need you.
I second that. I second that so much. With that, I will close out by saying thank you all for sticking with us through this episode. We're so glad that each and every one of you are here, whether it's live or on replay. And I'm going to remind everybody that it's never too late to start loving yourself, and you're only ever one decision away from a completely different life.
Awesome. Yes.
For more information on today's episode, check out the show notes. Recovery Stories is brought to you by Promises Behavioral Health's rooted alumni community. If you or a loved one are struggling, have questions, or ready to take the next step, call our admission center at 888-648-4098. Or visit us online at www.promisesbehavioralhealth.com. Our team is ready and waiting to answer the call for help. Whether you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, or listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please share with your friends. Follow, subscribe, and leave us a review. We are grateful for you and hope that you have been encouraged by today's episode. As always, remember you are only one decision away from a completely different life, and it is never too late to start loving yourself.